3 knocks rattled hard against the door. Then silence. Then 3 more, harder. He pulled the door open. A woman fell forward into his chest. Her coat was soaked through. Her hands were shaking. Her hair was plastered to her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't speaking. She stood there, eyes wide, staring past him into the hallway. He asked her name. She didn't answer. He asked if she was hurt. She shook her head. Then she pressed her palm flat against his mouth and whispered 6 words he would never forget. "Don't tell anyone I was here." The man holding the door was Daniel Hale. The woman in his arms was a stranger. She would be gone by sunrise, leaving a gold ring on his kitchen table. Why did she come to his door? And why did she need no one to know? Stay with me on this one. He'd been about to go to bed. That was the part he remembered most clearly years later. He'd been about to go to bed. It was a Tuesday in October. The kind of cold rain that finds the gaps in your roof and the soft spots in your life. Daniel Hale lived in a small house at the end of a long gravel road, 3 miles outside a town that wasn't on most maps. He was 41. He'd been divorced for 6 years, and he hadn't had a visitor in months. He'd just shut off the kitchen light when the knocks came. His first thought was that someone had run into trouble on the road. The bridge 2 miles south flooded every fall. Once or twice a year a stranger ended up at his door asking for a phone. He came back down the stairs. He turned on the porch light. He opened the door. And there she was. She wasn't carrying anything. No bag. No phone. No keys. Her coat was so wet it had turned almost black. Her shoes were ruined. She was maybe 35. She was beautiful in a way that didn't quite register at first, because everything about her was wrong. Wet, cold, out of breath, and looking behind her like the road might come up the steps after her. She didn't ask to come in. She just stepped past him and stood in the hallway, dripping on the floor. Daniel closed the door. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He said the only thing he could think of. "Are you all right?" She nodded once. She wasn't. He brought her a towel from the hallway closet. He brought her one of his old sweaters. He put the kettle on because that was what his mother had always done when someone needed something and you didn't know what they needed. He set a mug down in front of her at the kitchen table. She sat. She held the towel against her face. She didn't move. "Did your car break down?" he asked. She shook her head. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head again. "Should I call someone?" That one she answered. She looked up at him. Her eyes were a strange color, gray-green, and they were the steadiest thing about her. "No," she said. Then she said, "Please." Daniel sat down across from her. He didn't push. His father had been a quiet man, and he taught Daniel that some questions get answered if you wait long enough and don't ask them out loud. So he waited. After a long time she said, "I just need an hour." He nodded. "And then I'll go." He nodded again. She didn't drink the tea. She held the mug in both hands and watched the steam come off it. Every few minutes her eyes went to the window. He noticed that. He noticed she'd taken the chair that gave her the clearest view of both the front door and the back. He noticed she still hadn't taken off her coat, even though it was soaked, because if she had to run again, she didn't want to leave it behind. He didn't ask her name. She didn't give it. After about 20 minutes, she finally took the coat off. She laid it across another chair. Underneath, she was wearing a dark blue dress. There was a thin gold chain at her throat, and on her left hand, on the 3rd finger, there was a ring. It was a plain gold band with a single small stone. The stone was deep green. Daniel had never been a man who knew about stones. She caught him looking. She put her right hand over her left, and the ring disappeared under it. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's fine," she said. That was the first full sentence she'd spoken in his house. Her voice was low and a little hoarse, like someone who had been quiet for a long time before tonight. He stood up. He told her he'd be right back. He went into the front room. He stood there for a minute with his hand on the back of a chair, and he tried to think. He had no phone numbers to call. He didn't know who would help. He didn't know who to trust. He went back to the kitchen. She was still there. She hadn't moved. She was watching the window. He sat down again and he said very quietly, "You can stay as long as you need." Her eyes came back to his. She didn't thank him. She just nodded once. And something in her face came loose for half a second and then locked back into place. Daniel didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she was running from. He didn't know that by morning she would be gone, and that the ring she was hiding under her hand would be sitting in the middle of his kitchen table. All he knew in that moment was that he didn't want her to leave. She slept on the couch. He gave her 2 blankets and a pillow from the hall closet. He didn't ask if she wanted the bedroom. Something told him she wouldn't want to be in a room with only one door. He turned out the lights. He went upstairs. He lay on his back in the dark and listened. He heard nothing. He didn't sleep for a long time. He kept thinking about the way she'd looked at the window. He kept thinking about how when he'd given her the sweater her hands had been cold all the way through. Not cold like a person who'd been in the rain. Cold like a person who hadn't been warm in days. Around 2 in the morning he heard her get up. He went down. He thought she might be leaving. She wasn't. She was standing at the kitchen sink in his sweater, drinking a glass of water with her back to him. She heard him come in. She didn't turn around. "I'm sorry I woke you," she said. "You didn't." She put the glass down. She still didn't turn. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel." "Daniel," she said, like she was learning how it tasted. "What's yours?" She was quiet for a long time. "It's better if I don't tell you," she said. He didn't argue. He stood in the doorway and waited. She turned around then. She looked at him in the dim light. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were the kind of tired that goes past tears. "I want to tell you something," she said, "but I can't tell you all of it. And what I do tell you, you can't ever say to anyone. Can you do that?" "Yes. I mean ever. Not in 5 years. Not in 20. Not on your worst day." "Yes." She looked at him a long time. Then she nodded. "I left a man tonight," she said. She didn't say his name. "I've been planning it for a long time," she said. "I had it down to the minute. And then it rained. And then my car wouldn't start. And then I saw your light." "Okay. He's going to look for me," she said. "He has people who will look for me. He has more money than you think anyone could have. If he finds out I was here, he will hurt you." "He won't find out. You don't know that." "He won't find out from me." She looked at him for a long time. He thought she might cry then. She didn't. "Why are you doing this?" she said. He didn't know how to answer that. He didn't know himself. "I don't know," he said. "Because you knocked." That was all he had. She nodded. She came over to the table. She sat down in the chair she'd been in earlier. He sat down across from her. For an hour she talked in small pieces. She didn't tell him her name. She didn't tell him the man's name. She didn't tell him where she was going. She told him she had a sister somewhere. She told him she had a place she could reach by tomorrow night if everything went the way she'd planned. She told him she had been preparing for 2 years. She told him there were 3 locked doors in her old house and that the key to the second one had taken her 11 months to find. She didn't cry. She just talked. Daniel listened. He didn't take notes. He didn't ask follow-up questions. He listened the way you listen to something you know you'll only hear once. Around 4 in the morning she stopped talking and put her head down on her arms on the table. After a few minutes she lifted her head. "I'm going to leave before it gets light," she said. "Okay. I need you to promise me one more thing." "Okay. Don't try to find me." He didn't answer right away. "I mean it, Daniel. Don't try. Even if you want to. Even if you think you're helping. You can't help me. The only way you help me is by not knowing where I am." "All right. Say it." "I won't try to find you." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand on top of his. Her fingers were warm now. She left them there for maybe 5 seconds. Then she stood up. She went back to the couch. She lay down. Within a minute her breathing changed and she was asleep. Daniel sat at the table until the windows started to turn gray. Then he got up to make coffee. When he came back into the room with 2 cups, she was gone. The blankets were folded. The pillow was on top of them. And in the middle of the kitchen table, where she'd been sitting, was the ring. He stood there with the 2 coffees in his hands. He set them down. He didn't pick the ring up. He went to the front door. It was unlocked. He went out onto the porch. The rain had stopped. The road was empty. There were no tire tracks in his gravel that hadn't been there the night before. There were no footprints in the wet grass. She was gone like she'd never been there. He went back inside. He sat down at the kitchen table across from where she'd sat. He looked at the ring. He didn't touch it for almost an hour. Then, finally, he reached out and he picked it up. It was lighter than he'd expected. The stone caught the morning light. He could see, on the inside of the band, a thin engraved line. He didn't read it yet. He didn't want to. He put the ring back down in the middle of the table. He stood up. He walked over to the counter. He picked up the phone. He held it for a long time. Then he put it back down. He'd promised. He went upstairs. He took a shower. He put on clean clothes. He drove to work. He sat at his desk and answered emails. He talked to 2 clients on the phone. He ate a sandwich at his desk. He did not tell anyone what had happened. That night he drove home. He walked into the kitchen. The ring was still on the table where he'd left it. He sat down across from it. He thought it was over. He really did. 3 days later, 2 men came to his door. It was a Friday afternoon. Daniel was home early. He was standing in the kitchen putting away groceries when he heard the car. He looked through the window. A dark sedan. 2 men in suits getting out. He set down the bag he was holding. The knock was different from hers. It was a knock that wasn't asking. Daniel opened the door. He let them see his hands. The first man was older, maybe 50. Short hair, careful face. The second was younger and bigger and stood half a step behind. The older man smiled with his mouth only. "Are you Daniel Hale?" he said. "Yes. I'm sorry to bother you. We're looking for a woman. She may have come through here Tuesday night. Family. We're worried about her." He held up a photo on his phone. It was her. She was smiling in the photo. She looked younger. She was standing in a garden somewhere with the sun behind her. Daniel looked at the photo. He didn't move his face. "I haven't seen her," he said. "You sure?" "Yes. Tuesday night. Late. Anyone come down this road who wasn't supposed to be on it?" "Not that I noticed." The older man kept smiling. The younger one was looking past Daniel into the house. "Mind if we come in for a minute? Just to talk?" "Yes, I mind." That made the older man's smile widen a little, like it pleased him. "Fair enough." He gave Daniel a card. A name. A number. A company Daniel had never heard of with a name that didn't tell you anything. "If you remember anything," the man said, "you call me, day or night. There's money in it for you. She isn't well. She needs to come home." "All right. Don't lose that card, Mr. Hale." "I won't." They got back in the car. They sat there for almost a full minute before they pulled away. Daniel stood in his doorway and watched them go down the gravel road and turn onto the highway. Then he closed the door. Then he locked it. Then he sat down on the floor. He sat there for a long time. He'd known something was wrong. She told him. But knowing it and seeing the men who were looking for her were 2 different things. Those men hadn't been worried. They had been hunting. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button and stay with this one. Because what Daniel did in the next 48 hours is the part of this story I want you to remember. He didn't call the number. He didn't call the police. He didn't call anyone. He stood up off the floor. He walked over to the kitchen table. He looked at the ring. He picked it up. He carried it upstairs. He put it in a small wooden box that had belonged to his grandfather. He put the box at the back of a closet shelf, behind a stack of old sweaters he hadn't worn in years. Then he came back downstairs and he did what he should have done on Tuesday night. He went around the house and he locked every window. The phone call came 2 days later. It was a Sunday morning. He answered it without thinking. There was breathing on the other end. No voice, just breathing. He listened for 10 seconds. Then he hung up. The phone rang again that night. Same thing. Then the next morning he came downstairs and the back door was standing half open. He hadn't left it open. Nothing was missing. Nothing was broken. But the door that he had locked himself with his own hand 2 nights before was now open 6 inches and the floor inside was wet from the dew. Someone had wanted him to know they had been in his house. Daniel went upstairs. He went to the closet. He moved the sweaters. The wooden box was still there. The ring was still inside. They hadn't found it. He sat down on the floor of the closet and he held the ring in his hand for a long time. Then, for the first time, he turned it in the light and read what was engraved on the inside of the band. It was a single line, small letters, carefully cut. For E. V. May 17, 1989. He read it 3 times. E. He didn't know her name, but he knew her first letter now. V. That was the man. And there was a date. A date a man might engrave on a ring he gave to a woman on a day he wanted her to remember forever. A wedding date. Daniel sat on the floor of his closet with that ring in his hand and he thought about the photograph the man with the careful smile had shown him. He thought about the garden in the photograph. He thought about how the woman in the photograph had been smiling. He thought about how a person could smile in a garden in the sun and still be living inside a locked house. And he made a decision. He had told her he wouldn't try to find her. He'd meant it, but he hadn't promised anything about the man. He started with what he had. E.V. May 17, 1989. He went to the library on Saturday and he sat in front of a microfilm machine for 6 hours. He looked through marriage announcements in newspapers up and down 3 states for the spring of 1989. He didn't know what city. He didn't know what name. But May 17th was a Tuesday, and not many people get married on Tuesdays. He found her on the 4th day. A small announcement in a paper from a town called Glen Haven, 240 miles north. The bride was Elena Mills. The groom was Victor Marsh. The photograph was small and grainy, but the eyes were the same eyes that had looked at him across his kitchen table. Elena. Her name was Elena. He sat in front of that microfilm machine and he said her name out loud, in a library, in a room full of strangers, and none of them looked up. Elena Mills. Glen Haven. He drove there the next morning. It was a small town with a tall white church and 1 main street. He parked behind the church. He went inside. There was an older woman arranging hymnals in the pews. He told her he was looking for the Mills family. He said an old friend had asked him to deliver something. The woman looked at him for a long time. Then she gave him an address. Karen Mills lived in a small blue house at the edge of town. She answered the door with a dish towel in her hand. She was maybe a few years older than Elena. She had the same gray-green eyes. "Yes," she said. "My name is Daniel Hale," he said. "I think your sister came to my house on a Tuesday night in October. I think she left something with me. I think you might be the only person in the world I can give it to." Karen Mills went very still. Then she stepped back from the door and she let him in. They sat in her kitchen. He took the ring out of his pocket. He set it on the table between them. Karen looked at it. She didn't pick it up. She just looked at it for a long time. Then she put her hand over her mouth, and then she put both hands over her face, and then she cried. She cried for about 3 minutes and Daniel didn't move. When she stopped, she wiped her eyes with the dish towel that was still in her hand. She looked at him. "She made it," she said, like she was telling herself. "She made it that night," Daniel said. "She left before sunrise. I don't know where she went after that." "I know where she went," Karen said. I've known for 3 weeks. She got there. She's safe. I haven't been able to tell anyone. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Tell me about him, he said. Karen looked at him for a long moment, and then she told him. Victor Marsh had money. Old money and new money. He had a company that did things the family didn't ask questions about. He had been 12 years older than Elena when they married. The first year had been like a dream. The second year he'd hit her for the first time. By the third year she had stopped telling anyone what was happening because she had learned, slowly and carefully, that the people she told started having problems. A friend lost her job. A doctor lost his license. Karen herself had been afraid to take a phone call from her own sister for almost 2 years. Elena had been planning her escape since 2017. She had been preparing. She had been hiding small things. Money, documents, a phone he didn't know about. She had practiced driving the route in her head every night for a year. She had picked October because that was when he traveled for business and the staff was reduced. And the night she left, it had rained. And her car had broken down. And she had seen Daniel's porch light. She told me about you, Karen said. She sent me a letter from where she is now. She said a stranger let her into his house and gave her a sweater and asked her name and didn't ask again when she wouldn't say. She said it was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in 20 years. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. He looked at the ring on the table. What do I do with it? He said. I'll send it to her. Will she want it? Karen thought about that for a long time. I'll ask her. He stood up to go. Karen walked him to the door. On the porch, she put her hand on his arm. The men who came to your house, she said. They'll come back. I know. You should leave for a while. I'm not going to leave. She looked at him with something that was almost a smile. She said you wouldn't. The men did come back. They came back twice more that fall. Once in late October and once in early December. The second time the younger one shoved Daniel hard against the doorframe and the older one put a hand on his chest like a man holding back a dog. They asked the same questions. Daniel gave the same answers. He had not seen her. He did not know her. He could not help. The third time they came, in March, the older man stood on Daniel's porch and looked at him for a long quiet moment, and then he said, All right, Mr. Hale. I believe you. And he turned around and he walked to the car and he never came back. 3 weeks later Karen called. Victor Marsh was dead. Heart attack. 61 years old. He had collapsed in his own driveway. It's over, Karen said. Daniel sat down on the floor of his kitchen and he didn't say anything for a long time. Daniel, she said. I'm here. She wants to keep the ring, Karen said. She wants to keep it because she wants to remember that you held it for her. The years went by. Daniel kept his life small. He kept his job. He kept his house. He kept his promises. He never spoke about Elena to anyone. Not to a friend, not to a woman he dated for 2 years and didn't marry, not to a brother who came to visit at Christmas and asked him once if he ever got lonely out there at the end of the road. He'd say, sometimes lonely, mostly not. That was true. The kitchen table was still the same kitchen table. 6 chairs. A scratch in the corner from a pan he'd dropped in 1998. The light over it had been replaced twice. The chair she'd sat in that night was the one closest to the window. He never sat in it himself. He didn't make a thing of it. He just didn't sit there. Once, about 4 years after, a young woman came to his door selling magazines. She had dark hair. He answered the door and for half a second his heart did something it hadn't done in a long time. Then she smiled and her eyes were brown and she was 22 years old. Daniel apologized and said he didn't need any magazines and closed the door. He stood there for a minute with his hand on the wood. Then he went back to whatever he had been doing. He didn't try to find Elena. He didn't write to Karen. He didn't ask. He held what he had been given that night the way you hold a small candle in a dark hallway. You don't ask the candle to be more than it is. You just walk with it. And when it goes out, you stand there a minute and then you keep going in the dark. The first postcard came in his 8th year. He came home from work and it was on the floor under the mail slot. A picture of a coastline he didn't recognize. No return address. The postmark was blurred. On the back, in a small careful hand, was a single line. "I'm still here because you didn't tell." There was no signature. He didn't need one. He stood in his hallway with that postcard in his hand and he didn't move for a long time. Then he went into the kitchen. He opened a cabinet. He taped the postcard to the inside of the door, on the side where you'd see it only if you opened the cabinet and looked. Then he closed the cabinet. Then he made dinner. 3 more came over the years. The second one had a picture of a market somewhere with bright fruit and a sky he didn't recognize. The line on the back said, "I think of you on rainy nights." The third one was a photograph of a single window in a stone wall. The line said, "I am a person again." The fourth one came in his 19th year. It was a picture of a small garden. The line on the back said, "Thank you for the sweater." He cried for the first time about her then. He'd never cried about her before. He didn't know why he cried that time and not the others. Maybe because he was older. Maybe because she was older too. Maybe because there is something about being thanked 20 years on for a small thing you did in the dark on a Tuesday night that breaks a man in a way other things don't. He taped that one to the cabinet too. With the rest, he never wrote back. He had no address. He never tried to find her. He had made a promise once, and he was the kind of man who would keep a promise made to a stranger in a kitchen at 3 in the morning until the day he died. He's older now. He still lives in the same house at the end of the same gravel road. The porch light still comes on when the sun goes down. He sits at the kitchen table sometimes in the evenings in the chair that isn't hers, and he looks at the chair that is. He thinks about how a person can change a life in 4 hours and never come back and still be, somehow, in the room with you for the rest of it. He thinks about the ring sometimes. He hopes she's wearing it again. Or he hopes she isn't. He's not sure which would be better. He thinks about the men with the careful smiles. He thinks about the night the back door was open and the floor was wet. He thinks about the way her hand felt on top of his for 5 seconds at 4 in the morning. He thinks about the words she'd whispered with her palm pressed against his mouth. "Don't tell anyone I was here." He never did. Not on his worst day. Not on his best. Not in 5 years. Not in 20. And on rainy Tuesdays in October, when the wind comes down off the hills and the porch light flickers and the house feels emptier than it should, he sometimes looks at the door and waits for 3 quick knocks that he knows are never going to come again. And that, in the end, was the gift. She came to his door once. She left her ring on his table. She asked him not to tell. And by keeping that one small promise, he learned the thing most men spend a lifetime not learning, that love isn't always something you hold. Sometimes love is something you let walk back out into the rain. And then you close the door. And then you let it be.